Well, what a special day. I'm very thankful for the many who have laid down their lives for our freedom. Think about Christians all over the world who are suffering for their faith right now. We are blessed in that we had people who would sacrifice themselves so that we could worship now in freedom and enjoy the pleasures and benefits of a free nation. May we never forget that. Well, we've been working our way through the life of Joseph, and we're going to come back to that today. 2 weeks ago, you may remember that Zach was speaking. He worked us through chapter 39, and most of it got us down to beginning part of verse 21. Today we're going to pick that up. We're going to deal with chapter 40 primarily, if you want to turn in your Bible there. One of the things that has become crystal clear to me through this study, and I hope that it has for you as well, I hope it's been very obvious as we've made our way through the life of Joseph, that Joseph was a guy that was very faithful to God. He was a very loyal servant of God. And you see that through every aspect of his life, through all the difficulties, through all the trials, through all the problems. You see him faithfully serving God. But here's a question for you to consider. What did it get him? What did he get out of it? Think about it. Because he told the dreams that God had given to him, he was hated by his brothers. Because he was hated by his brothers, he was thrown into a pit where they were going to leave him for dead until they came up with a better idea to make money off of him and sold him to the Ishmaelites. He was sold to the Ishmaelites. They carried him to Egypt. And in Egypt, what happened? He was sold to Potiphar as a slave, where he served in Potiphar's house for a long time, until eventually Potiphar's wife decided she wanted more from Joseph than what he was giving. When he rejected her, she lied about him, said he tried to rape her. Potiphar came home, heard the story, took Joseph and threw him into prison. And now as we begin chapter 40, we see that Joseph is in prison. What did his faithfulness to God get him? You may say, well, you don't sound like a preacher right now. I want us to face it. I want us to see, because we're going to see a transition begin to happen. We won't see much of it today, but we'll see a lot more of it next Sunday. But we're going to begin to see the transition. But for right now, things look quite difficult and problematic for Joseph. He's in prison. And for what? He's been serving God faithfully. And yet I would tell you this, please hear this. Prison is exactly where Joseph needed to be in order to fulfill and carry out the plan of God. Sounds harsh, doesn't it? And yet, he is exactly where he needs to be. Now, Joseph wouldn't understand that for some time. He couldn't predict the future. He wasn't a prophecy person. He had been given dreams by God that told some of the future, and therefore, no doubt, he could put some pieces together and have a vision of what he thought would happen. But I believe when he was having those dreams, he would have never anticipated the journey that he was going to take through all of these incredibly difficult roads. Can't imagine he felt that way. And yet it goes back to something we've said time and time again. God's not so concerned about our comfort as He is with preparing us to fulfill His purpose, to fulfill His plan, equipping us, readying us, maturing us in our faith. God's not so concerned with comfort in this life. Jesus said it best. He said, in this life you will have trials. He said, take up your cross daily and follow me. In other words, this life is not made for comfort. This life is made for preparation. Preparation for what comes next in this life and for what comes next in eternal life. Many people would look at this story and say, well, so that means that If I'm faithful to God, I can expect there to be problem upon problem upon problem. And the short answer to that is, well, yeah, maybe the case. But I think the better answer is to look beyond the problems. To look into Joseph's life and to see, yes, he went through many troubling times, many difficult times, and yet God was with him through all of that. God was with Joseph. And therefore, the situations looked desperate, they looked hopeless, but for Joseph, he understood so clearly they are not desperate, they are not hopeless, because God is with me. It didn't make them any less trying, it didn't make them any less difficult, but it gave a hope for what was to come. It gave a hope because God was with him. At the end of chapter 39, we saw that Potiphar's wife had lied on Joseph. Potiphar came home, heard the story. He was angry. But instead of killing Joseph like he had every right to do if he really believed the story of his wife, he instead put him into prison. So Joseph is in prison. But even in prison, we find Joseph being incredibly faithful to God. The Bible tells us that whatever your hands find to do, do it heartily, do it well, do it with enthusiasm as unto the Lord. Not as unto a master, not as unto people who mean evil towards you, but whatever it is your hands find to do it well as if you are doing it for God. Joseph took this to heart. Joseph understood the principle. The verse hadn't been given yet, but Joseph already understood the principle. And the Bible says that he served his master well. And as a result of his service and God being with him, he rose through the ranks, even in prison, to where the end of chapter 39 tells us that Joseph was set in charge of everyone in the prison. It says that nothing happened that Joseph didn't set into motion. It was all in his hands. Now this becomes very important now when we move into chapter 40. Let me read the first 3 verses to you. Sometime after this, after what? After Potiphar's wife lied about Joseph, he was thrown into prison. He's in prison for a period of time. Most people believe this is years at this point. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and the baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. Now, right off the bat, we need to understand that this is not coincidence happening here. It's not coincidence that Potiphar didn't kill Joseph, but instead put him in prison. It's not a coincidence that when Pharaoh got wind of a plot against his life, and these 2 guys must have been leading that plot, or at least there was an investigation to find out if they were, he, instead of killing them in the moment, put them in prison so the investigation could continue. It's not a coincidence that they wind up in the same place. This is the work of God. Now, for the chief baker and for the chief cupbearer, they would not have known that they were serving the purpose of Almighty God, but the truth is, God was the one calling the shots. God was the one working out His plan, and now He brings these 3 people together. Verse 4, it says, the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, these 2 men, these 2 officers of Pharaoh, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. So they're in this prison for a period of time. And while they're there, Potiphar, who is the captain of the guard, the one who is over this prison, tells Joseph, I know you're over everything in here, but I want you to take special care of these guys. Why? Because there's an investigation ongoing, and if these guys are proven innocent, they're going to get their very important places back in the presence of Pharaoh, and I don't want them looking here with anger toward me for the way they were treated in this prison. So Joseph, your responsibility is to care for these guys. I think this is a pretty interesting place for Joseph to be. Joseph is in prison for something he did not do, perfectly innocent. And yet, instead of going in and saying, you know what, I didn't do this, and I'm not doing anything other than what you forced me to do. What we find Joseph continually doing is serving other people. And we talked about that a little bit last week, but I think it's important to understand the heart of Joseph. That Joseph had such a heart for others. He was in a position where his focus and his gaze could have been on his own problems, could have been on his own circumstances. But instead, what Joseph did was look after the needs of others. Let's continue the process. Verses 5 through 8. One night, they both dreamed. The cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have dreamed dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." I find this very, very interesting in two ways. Number one is that Joseph was really concerned about these guys. Once again, we go back to the fact that Joseph had so many problems in his own life. He was facing so many difficulties. How in the world could he see beyond those difficulties to see the problems of someone else? And yet that was the heart of Joseph. For people who are bitter and angry, who are dwelling on revenge, they are not typically able to see beyond their own problems. Joseph had somehow managed to push these problems aside, push the thought of this injustice to himself aside, to where he could see the problems of others in this situation. It is such an incredible picture of Jesus for us. Such an incredible picture of Jesus. You remember, Jesus was the most greatly given injustice in his life when one of his own disciples betrayed him to the religious leaders of the day. They brought him into a mock trial. They were not looking for truth in his trial. They had already determined the outcome of the trial. He was going to be crucified. Going to be found guilty, and he's going to be crucified. It doesn't matter how innocent he is. This is the way it's going to go. Jesus then had his beard plucked from his face. He was spat upon. He was beaten. He was beaten across the back to the point that he barely was recognizable as a person. He was nailed to a cross, and there he is on the cross, struggling for breath, struggling to breathe. Hung beside him on either side were thieves. One of the thieves turned to him and said, "I recognize who you are now." In essence, that's what he was saying. He said, "Will you remember me when you come into your kingdom?" Jesus could have said, "Buddy, just a few minutes ago you were making fun of me. Just a few minutes ago you were mocking me. I've got my own problems. You deal with yourself. I'm not doing anything for you." And yet what did Jesus say? In the middle of his problems today, "You will be with me in paradise." And then later he looked down and he saw his weeping mother standing in front of the cross. And he saw John, his disciple, beside her. And in concern for his mother, he said, "Woman, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother." He's in this time when he can barely breathe. He's heading toward death, and yet he's compassionate toward his mother. "I'm the oldest child, and yet I can't be there to care for you now. This one will care for you." It was also concern for John. John is heartbroken over what is happening to Jesus. And he gives John something to do. "John, don't dwell on your problems. Don't fixate on what's going on here. Instead, turn your sights toward someone else. Turn your attention off your problems to others." That's what Joseph did. Joseph could have been so bottled up in his own problems, but instead he took his eyes off of his problems and began to focus on the needs of others. I find that greatly interesting. I also find it interesting that the problem these guys had was not the fact that they are in prison. In fact, when Joseph asked them, what is it that's bothering you? Their response, "Well, we had these dreams. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. Had I been in Joseph's shoes, I believe I would have rolled my eyes at that point. Oh, you've got bad dreams. That's your problem. Oh, I am so sorry for you right now. You want to hear about some problems? Let me tell you about my life for a minute. Joseph doesn't do that. Somehow, Joseph knows that God is at work in this situation. And somehow, Joseph takes his eyes off of himself and he focuses them on God to see that God is moving the pieces of the puzzle around to fulfill His will and His purpose. The last part of verse 8 says this, "And Joseph said to them, 'Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me.'" Okay, some really interesting things taking place here. First of all, is that we understand or have to at least believe that Joseph is in very close connection to God. I mean, what is he saying? He's saying, your dreams have an interpretation, and God is the one who knows that interpretation. If you'll tell me your dreams, God will tell me the interpretation, and I will reveal that to you. Now, let me tell you something. If you're not close to God, you're not going to be that brave with what God is going to do or what God isn't going to do. If you're not walking closely with God, experiencing the moving of His Spirit in your life to know that God is leading you to do something or to say something, you would not be that brave. If I've gotten so bent out of shape with my anger, with my frustration, with my fears, with my anxiety, with my need for revenge, if I've gotten so wrapped up in that I push God aside in this moment, what would make me think that God would talk to me at all? What would make me think that? But it's also amazing to me that when Joseph had the opportunity here to put himself in a better light, he doesn't do that. He doesn't rob God of His glory. He doesn't say, well, you tell me. He knows that God's going to tell him the interpretation. You just tell me those dreams and I'm going to interpret it for you. Joseph does not rob God of the glory that belonged to God, but instead simply said, is it not God that gives interpretations? Tell me your dream. God will give you the answer. Did you know that God does speak to people through dreams? Throughout the Bible, from time to time, we find where God is speaking to people. You say, okay, well, that's something that happened in Bible times, but it doesn't happen now. Let me read to you a couple of verses that may change your opinion on that. Acts chapter 2, just one verse rather, verse 17 says, "In the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams." Throughout the Bible, God would speak to people through their dreams. Now, this is something that to me I was totally surprised by. 2-to-1. God spoke to people who were not part of His chosen people, who were not part of the family of God, 2 times more frequently than He did for those who were part of His family. You can go back and detail this out and you will find that to be the case, that twice as often God was speaking to people who were not part of the family of God more so than He was to those who were part of His family. We actually see this still taking place in our day and time. We hear stories coming out of Muslim countries even now of how God would appear to people in a dream. Jesus would show up in someone's dream and would tell them, tomorrow you go to such and such a place and you look for this person wearing these clothes and he will tell you about me. It's incredible to think about. But while God does still speak to people through dreams, I think it's also important to understand that not every dream is God speaking to you. In fact, most dreams are not God speaking to you. In fact, most of us will probably never have God speak to us through a dream. You go back through the Bible and you will find that throughout the pages of the Bible, there are those that God spoke to in dreams, but there are 100 times over those that God didn't. At least He didn't tell us He did. It's also important to understand that if you are one that God speaks to through a dream, that if you find that that dream somehow conflicts with Scripture, you need to understand, no, that wasn't God giving me that dream. God's Word through dreams will never conflict with His Word, the Bible. Never. And if there is any conflicting going on, that is not a message from God. Not at all. Verses 9 through verse 13. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Pretty good news. Pretty good news for the cupbearer. Okay, I'm going to get out of prison. Now, I just wonder, was there any place in the cupbearer's mind where he said, Joseph, that's a really good interpretation, and I really appreciate that, but how do I know that you're really telling me the truth? I mean, how do I know that God's really giving you this information? I like it. I mean, it certainly lifts my spirits, but I just don't know if I can really buy into that just yet. We'll see what happens in 3 days, but I don't think that's what happened here. We aren't told that there seemed to be any doubt in the mind of the cupbearer. It doesn't appear that he questioned Joseph. Okay, well, now tell me a little bit more. Give me a few more details. It seems that he believed him completely. Now, why? Well, the Bible tells us that Pharaoh saw, recognized, understood that God was with Joseph. And now these men have been confined in prison for a period of time. They've been with Joseph during that time for a period of time. And as a result, I believe that not only Potiphar saw that God was with Joseph, but these guys got to see that too. Something special about this guy. Now, he's not like the other prisoners in here. What would make him want to serve us like this? God must be with him. You know, I can't help but believe that people with whom we work or in school or in our communities are watching us to see if there's something different about us. If we are bold enough to claim to be a Christian, is there evidence of that in our lives? I believe there was in Joseph's life. I believe it was very obvious. And therefore there was no question about what he was saying. Joseph now does something that I absolutely love. Let me read to you verses 14 and 15. After telling the interpretation of the dream, he says, only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into this pit. I love the fact that Joseph begins to make a case for himself. He begins to tell this guy, I've given you this very good interpretation. 3 days, you're going to see that it's real. And when it happens, would you remember me? Would you remember me? You know, some people would say, no, that's just not faith. There's where his problem is. He doesn't have faith. He should just wait on God to get him out of that. I think that would be quite foolish. God has given him an opportunity to make a case for himself. God doesn't condemn him doing it. You know, when we find ourselves in problems, if there's a way out, maybe that's God giving us the open door and we take advantage of that. But I also love the way Joseph approached it. It's truly mesmerizing to me, the way he approached it. It's so different from the way I believe I would have done it. Joseph very quickly makes a case for himself. He isn't holding out hope in his ability to make this case. He isn't holding out hope in the ability of the person he's making the case to do something about his specific situation. He simply makes the case and then he moves on. But in making his case, what I see him doing differently than what I believe I would have done is he never belittles his brothers in the process. These evil brothers. He doesn't start out by saying, well, you know, ultimately this is my dad's fault. He loved me more than the other guys, and he let them know it. And as a result, they hated me. They hated me so much, they wanted to kill me. They threw me in a pit, were just going to leave me there to die, but then they got a better offer. Let's sell him. Let's get some money out of him. It's their fault. The reason I'm here, it's their fault. I should be a free man, getting ready to enjoy the inheritance of my father, living with my family. It's their fault. So when you get out of here, you tell Pharaoh that I'm an innocent man. And on top of that, let me tell you about Potiphar and his wife. Talking about a crazy group of people. I think there's something for us to learn in this. It is so easy when someone has wronged us to want to get even. It is so easy when someone has wronged us to want to take advantage of every opportunity to speak, to make light of them, to bring daggers and throw them their direction. And yet I believe God is showing us, you know what? You're not here in error. It's not a fluke or a coincidence that you wind up here in prison. I've got a reason for this. Trust me through the process. I will repay. How did Jesus say it? Jesus said, if your enemy offends you, do good to him. If they curse you and spitefully use you, bless them. Bless my enemy? Joseph said, I got a chance here, and maybe Pharaoh will hear my story and he'll go take vengeance on my brothers. But in fact, what Joseph understood more clearly is that vengeance belongs to the Lord. He will later, at the end of this story, when we complete this series, he will come to the place where he's talking to his brothers. He said, you meant this for evil. God meant it for good. God meant it for good. There's a verse we often quote when someone is going through difficult times. And maybe it should never be used during those times. Maybe it's something we teach people beforehand so they know it going into it. But we don't necessarily break it out in the middle of someone's problems. It's Romans 8:28. It says, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. You may say, well, you messed up there, Tom. This isn't good for Joseph. And this certainly can't fit his purpose. I mean, this is a horrible situation, and I would absolutely agree with you. It's a horrible situation. But if that's the way you're thinking, you misunderstood part of the verse. For Paul writing here in the book of Romans doesn't say all things work together for him who loves God according to his own purpose. But he said all things work together for those who love God, who are called according to God's purpose. Now, why is that so important? Because it is God who knows the beginning from the end. It is God who is the Alpha and the Omega. It is God who knows how moving this piece into a difficult situation prepares for His plan to be fulfilled in the future. How moving this piece in our lives and putting us in a very painful place may bring about the salvation of our children or our grandchildren, may bring about the movement of God in the lives of people that we don't even know. We don't understand the beginning from the end, but God does. God's got a plan. God's got a purpose. And so you can never separate the presence of God in your life with the purpose of God in your life. You may not be able to see it. You may not be able to discern what's happening, but you can understand if you are a child of God, God's presence is with you. God is with you. He has made us a promise that we can cling to. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I'm not going to abandon you in your difficult times. God was with Joseph in slavery. God was with Joseph in the prison. And we can rest assured God will be with us as well. And the presence of God then will always indicate the purpose of God is being carried out. Presence of God will always indicate that the plan of God is being played out in our lives. It may not be what we want it to be. It may not be going the way we want it to go. But the presence of God always indicates that the plan of God is being moved forward. We can trust God in those times. So while Joseph may not have understood it in the moment, God was at work in a big way. The plan of God would eventually bring about the physical salvation from starvation of an entire nation, of all his family, most of the known world during that time. Joseph was exactly where he needed to be in order to fulfill the plan of God. Let me read a little further. Verse 16 through 19. When the chief baker saw the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. All of a sudden, he's on board. I want you to hear my dream now. It was a good thing you told the cupbearer. I want to hear what you have to say to me. I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Now this is a tough one. I believe Joseph found himself in a pretty difficult place here. Joseph has great compassion for these guys. We've already seen that. And yet now God has revealed to him a very difficult truth about one of them. Joseph could have rationalized things in his head and said, you know what? 3 days is 3 days. Nothing's going to change. He's still going to die in 3 days. And so why would I make him worry about that for 3 days? Why don't I just tell him something that'll give him peace of mind? Let him enjoy his last 3 days. He's still going to die. That part's not going to change. But I'll just make him comfortable for these last 3 days. It sounds reasonable, right? But it wasn't reasonable to God. God had given to Joseph a truth to share. And Joseph was to share that truth exactly as it was given. It's not a big stretch for me to see the relationship of the truth that God has trusted us with. And how God expects us to share His truth. How God expects us. I've given to you the truth, the gospel of Jesus Christ. I've given you the truth. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. I've given you the truth. And yes, there will be those who do not want to hear it. Yes, there will be those who are seemingly offended by it. Yes, there will be those who hate you when you share the truth. But you have the truth to share, and you are to share it when those opportunities present themselves. Verses 20 through 23, on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all of his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position. He placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer, listen to this, did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So Joseph has told them in 3 days this is going to happen. It wasn't some obscure interpretation that anyone could have given. It wasn't that, I see something happening in the future. I don't know exactly when, but at some point in the future, and this could carry on and on and on. But Joseph, under the direction of God interpreting the dreams, in 3 days, you're going to know if I'm telling you the truth or not. 3 days. In 3 days, this interpretation will be proven accurate, and therefore I am hearing from God, or it will be proven false, and you will know that I am not hearing from God. 3 days. The sad part of this, Joseph has been through so much. I'm so thankful that he wasn't placing his total hope in what the cupbearer could do for him. I find myself very clearly in the life of the cupbearer. Forgetful. Very, very forgetful. I would hope that if someone lavished such kindness on me, that I would not forget, but I certainly will not point a finger at him as if to say, I'm above it, because I know better. But how disheartening this must have been for Joseph to some extent. His hope wasn't there. His hope is in God, and yet he still had the thoughts that maybe this would be the way God would use to get him out of this prison. And he was forgotten. Completely forgotten. Let me bring this to a conclusion. 3 things I think we take with us from this. Number 1, I think this is so important. If you're taking notes, these would be good to write down. Our circumstances should never determine the effort of our service. Our circumstances should never determine the effort of our service. The verse I quoted earlier, whatever your hands find to do, do it well. Do it with intensity. Do it with excellence as to the Lord. Regardless of what circumstances we may find ourselves living in the moment, it should not determine whether or not we serve God faithfully and we serve others faithfully. It ought to be a foregone conclusion. I am a child of God. I am property of God because He bought me with a very high price, the price of His Son, Jesus Christ. And therefore, I will glorify God in my circumstances and in my situation right now. I will serve others. Number 2, I think it's important to understand that there are no insignificant people in the family of God. There are no insignificant people in the family of God. You may be saying, well, I'm not one of you guys that stand on stage. I don't have a voice to sing or the ability to play an instrument. I don't have the ability to stand up and talk in front of people, and therefore, God may be with you guys, but I doubt really seriously if He even knows I'm in this church. Can I bring your thoughts back to the promise of God that He has given to every one of His children? And I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. God is with you all of your life. From the moment you come to Christ, God's presence is with you. It is very clearly given to us through God's Spirit in our lives, and it is the Spirit of God that directs us, that leads us, guides us into wisdom and understanding of the Scriptures. There are no insignificant people in the family of God. And number 3, God is at work in the life of His child, even when we can't see Him at work and don't know what He's up to. God is at work in the life of His child, even when we can't see that He's at work or know what He's up to. The presence of God always equals the purpose of God being carried out. Always. Presence of God always means that the plan of God is being carried out in your life. Always. You're not insignificant, and therefore God's plan applies to your life. God is at work in your life. God knew what was going to happen in the life of Joseph before he ever went out to see his brothers. Before ever they conspired to kill him, before ever they threw him into the pit, before they sold him to the Ishmaelites, before they took him to Egypt and sold him to Potiphar, before Potiphar's wife lied on him, before he was put in prison, before he ever met these guys, before he ever interpreted their dreams, before he was ever forgotten, God knew the exact road that Joseph was going to take in order to fulfill and complete his purpose. God knew it. You and I are no different. God knows exactly what our lives will involve. He's not so much concerned with our comfort as He is with fulfilling His will and His purpose in our lives. May we deeply trust God, even in our difficult times.